The PlayStation 1 was legendary.
We have a normal, healthy young man. And here we have a fellow who's been experimenting with PlayStation for only a few minutes.
It was Sony's first foray into home console gaming and made gigantic waves in the gaming and tech world. 3D graphics that shocked players at the time, an incredible library of games that live on in many memories today, and that sweet, sweet startup sound that still gives goosebumps. But most of that came later in the PS1 lifecycle. What did you have to play on day one? PS1 launched in North America on September 9th, 1995, and had a whopping 12 launch titles. In this video, I'll be showcasing and reviewing every launch title on the PlayStation 1 just to see how much juice you could squeeze out of the storied console on day one, and then ranking them from best to worst. I'm Ashton Lavelle, and let's have a conversation about the PlayStation 1 launch library. I knew going into this project that I would need to play some genres that I'm a bit more unfamiliar with. That was certainly the case with Power Serve 3D Tennis, developed by SPS. I'm more of an NFL and NBA kind of guy, and so this was going to be my first tennis game I've ever played since Wii Sports? Unfortunately for you tennis fans out there, Power Serve 3D Tennis is the most unremarkable launch game you could have picked up. It's hard to fully describe the game in depth because, well, it's just tennis, but bad. Everything about it is as bare bones and basic as you can get. There are just 3 courts to pick from, hard, lawn, and clay. You can also choose between 8 characters to play, as all of whom play the exact same way, so not really much of a point. And for some reason, the developers had a bright idea to start your match off in first person, which was wildly disorienting to me first time opening up the game. Eventually I found that you can actually just switch the camera angle with the press of a button, which is pretty nice to help me see the court better, but didn't exactly help my tennis skills. I tried my best to get the hang of the rhythm, but it just felt like the way the CPU hit the tennis ball would be impossible for me to react to. If they weren't smacking it directly at me, it felt like I had no possible way to reach the ball on time to hit it back. Not only that, but the hit detection on this ball was extremely inconsistent. Sometimes I could hit it from a mile away, and other times the ball flew right through my racket. Outside of playing this bad, bland version of tennis, there's literally nothing else to do. It's such an unremarkable experience that the Wikipedia page is even only 5 sentences long. It's gotta be one of the shortest Wikipedia pages I've ever seen. Unfortunately, tennis fans, picking this game up on launch day probably had a higher chance of resulting in your PS1 being returned rather than actually making somebody a tennis fan. I can't quite tell if making a movie about a video game and then making a video game about that movie about a video game is genius or downright stupid. Yet that's exactly what happened when Capcom created this monstrosity. Full disclosure, I haven't watched the Street Fighter movie, and judging from this experience, I'm not sure I ever will. The main mode of interest here in Street Fighter the movie, the game, is Movie Battle, where you play as Guile reenacting the plot of the movie. The Sega Saturn version actually even advertises digitized graphics from the hit movie on the front of their box, but it seems what Capcom meant was still images with generic music and slow scrolling text with only an occasional clip from the film and that classic low-fidelity FMV style iconic to the PS1 littered throughout. The only interesting bits actually come from the choices you make throughout the campaign. After every successful fight, you'll be given 2 options on how to proceed, and will fight different characters based on these decisions. There's also this arbitrary time limit that ticks down as you fight, which, if you fail too many, results in the game over. But you can retry a fight as many times as you want as long as you still have time on the timer. I actually like both of these ideas a lot. They're super inventive. It's just kind of unfortunate they were slapped into an awful video game. The sprite work here is rough, to say the least, and the actual fighting, frustrating. Look, I'm not a Street Fighter guy. Never have been. I've never been able to wrap my head around the complicated button inputs and using the semicircles and quarter circles. It's just not my jam. I respect those that do immensely, but it's not for me, so take that for what you will as I evaluate the gameplay. But at the same time, I do know when something feels cheap or cheesy in a video game. Certain moves or combinations felt simply unbeatable. At one point, I reached a brick wall in the form of Sagat, and this guy would become my arch nemesis. He was able to constantly spam a long-range beam that would prevent me from ever getting close, so he was zoning me, I understand that, but because of how slow the fighting is here, it was really hard to actually get in close. And if I ever did, there were often times where he would just immediately counter me with some other move that would break through my own or would be able to hit me before mine ever registered, and then he would take down my entire health bar. And he would just spam that over and over and over. That combination really grated on me and really took me out, ended up ruining my entire campaign run. Ultimately, there's not a lot to be excited in Street Fighter the movie, the game. It's ugly, tells a worse version of an already existing movie. The gameplay is cheap and frustrating. The only reason it didn't make the absolute bottom of the list is because it did get inventive with the time limit and choosing your own path during the campaign. Otherwise, there's no good reason to pick up this particular fighting game above the other two on this list on launch day. Did you ever look at Armored Core and think, this is cool and all, but like, I'd rather be playing a fighting game? Well, Zero Divide is for you. This 3D fighting game developed by Zoom sees you take control of one of 11 mechanized combatants in a single-player campaign or a 1v1 versus mode. The premise is pretty simple. A loud and super annoying voice that calls himself X-Tall commands you to fight through every single other robot in the game in order to face him. Do that, and you beat X-Tall, congrats, you just beat the game. Fights take place in a 3D battle arena where the objective is either to knock out your opponent or throw them off the stage. Each robot has their own playstyle and moveset, so you can pick your favorite, but the fighting is serviceable at best. The mechs are slow, stiff, and clunky, the moves equally so. Alongside your health bar is also a stamina bar underneath, which, if depleted, results in you falling down and becoming vulnerable to harsh punishment. This system is brutal and severely punishes even the smallest of mistakes. The AI seemed to have a perfect sense of when you would attack and when you would block, and would often whip out some annoying move that would instantly knock you down. In particular, this one character, Wild 3, he was egregious, and I'm starting to see a pattern between this and Street Fighter in terms of specific characters just really being annoying. Anytime he knocked me down, it would take ages for my stamina to recover, and then he would literally slam his mechanized bottom onto my face to deal a metric ton of damage, sometimes twice. It felt super imbalanced against the player. Call it a skill issue, I'm willing to admit that, but still, it definitely felt way too punishing for my stamina to be completely depleted on one attack, take forever to return, and then get hit with 2 or 3 butt slams in a row, only immediately to lose. The game literally taunts you about it too. If you choose to quit out and start fresh, the announcer will literally call you a wuss and say you should cry to your mom.
I can't believe you're giving up so soon. You're such a baby. Go home to your mama.
Not really my cup of tea, and I highly doubt there's a deep mechanical fighting game underneath all of the cheap tricks. So, it's better than Street Fighter, but only because the mechs look cooler, honestly. The graphics are a bit more interesting, and it didn't feel quite as spammable as Sagat's stupid beam attack, but ultimately, I wouldn't recommend picking this one on launch day either. ESPN Extreme Games on the surface appears to be a standard collection of sports minigames that includes at least bicycling, roller skating, skateboarding, and whatever this is. I fully expected to play this for about an hour and then do a brief write-up on a generic, forgettable sports game. So imagine my surprise then when I entered my first race with roller skates and discovered other roller skaters, skateboards, bicyclers, and those flatboard guys all flying past me at breakneck speed. Oh, and then I got punched in the face. Yeah, you can literally just punch and kick people in this game. It's absolutely hilarious. The entire experience racing in this game is kinda nuts. You can choose from a handful of tracks to race on and then choose whether you'd like a roller skate, skateboard, a bicycle, or this flatboard to make your way across the track. You can also select from a variety of characters, each with their own stats indicating which sport equipment they'd be best with. In races themselves, you can expect to pass through several gates that earn you cash, punch and kick other racers off the track, into other races, or even into walls and obstacles, and you'll be doing all of that while trying to go as fast as humanly possible. Honestly, picking the bicycle and just kicking the daylights out of anyone who gets near me was one of the funnest things I did during this entire project. The game is also fairly hard, which seems by design. See, the game actually has a pretty neat progression system. After each race, you can use the cash you earn from that race to buy better equipment for your racer, a better bike or a better skateboard as an example. With different combinations you can make between character and equipment, there's a surprising amount of detail here. The development team at Sony Interactive Studios, which is now known as 989, really tried to make this game more than just a simple sports sim. While at the ripe old age of 26, I won't exactly be spending all of my time into unlocking all these equipment pieces and really getting good at the game. I really appreciate that this kind of game exists, and I think out of almost any sports game to get with a console at launch, ESPN Extreme Games has to be one of the coolest I've ever seen. What really hurts it is its lack of variety. The game is literally just racing, in a single direction, on a few different tracks. It gets pretty monotonous and boring after a while, even if kicking dudes into brick walls never really gets old. I think if the races played a little better and handled a little better, this could have made it pretty high on my list, but for now, I don't think it'd be worth it over the other sport game that's on this list. I had no idea what Total Eclipse Turbo was before booting up the game. Honestly, it was pretty exciting booting into the game fresh, only seeing what the cover looked like and seeing what surprises were inside. And oh, was I surprised when I saw a full animation intro to the name of the developer, Crystal Dynamics, the creators of so many games throughout gaming history, from Gex, The Legacy of Kain, the Tomb Raider reboot, and the soon-to-be released Perfect Dark reboot. Pretty awesome seeing their name pop up here all the way in 1995. After that, I felt like I was in for a treat, and Crystal Dynamics did not disappoint, at least with the opening cutscene. Total Eclipse Turbo begins with this fairly long, at least for early PS1 standards, cutscene setting up a story about an alien attack on Earth. These aliens use a huge super laser to fire some kind of energy ball at our sun. I guess it destroyed it, or almost destroyed it? I'm not exactly sure what happened with it. We then take the role of a badass space jet pilot, flying off to complete missions and take down the evil aliens. The gameplay itself is an on-rails space shooter game in the vein of Star Fox. You can move left and right, shoot your laser gun, fire off a special missile that destroys everything on screen, and roll side to side. The controls are absurdly sensitive. You so much as breathe on the directional pad and your ship is going to blast off toward that side at full speed. Aiming is also frustrating as there's no crosshair, and graphically, visuals can get quite messy, making it difficult to really know at what elevation you need to be in order to hit your target. After completing each level in an area, face off against the final boss and then move on to the next set of missions, gaining a new military rank as you go. When the visuals do get wildly out of control, my game crashed quite a few times. That may have been more an issue with the emulator than the game itself, so it's hard to judge it and hard to say, but I tried a few different graphical settings to no avail. Total Eclipse Turbo is just a bit much for me. It's neat, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad game. I just don't enjoy how it controls and how sensitive the inputs are. But for some of you sickos out there who like this high-speed, quick reflexes type of space shooter, it might be for you. It's also the port of a 3DO game of the same name, so there's potential that that version may control better than this one. If I was picking this up on launch day, I don't think I'd be mad. In fact, I think I would find it pretty impressive with its long and highly animated cutscenes. But for the me of the modern day, I don't think I'll spend much time on this game any longer. In only 6 months, developer Tamsoft created Battle Arena Toshinden, a 3D arena fighting game billed as a Sega Saturn killer. It was one of the earliest games to focus on weapons rather than the fighter's own individual characteristics to differentiate them from each other. It also has a dodge roll, so I guess that means it's like the Dark Souls of fighting games. Right? For fans of the genre, it's pretty neat looking back at this game. It can be a bit clunky by modern standards, and honestly, my gameplay is doing it no favors. I'm not really a fighting game guy, so my skills are failing me pretty badly. In fact, perhaps it says something that all 3 of the fighting games available on launch day are closer to the bottom on my list. The characters are unique, have different ranges, speeds, playstyles that are heavily dependent on their weapon, which adds a lot of variety. The game ended up being pretty popular and spawned several sequels too, so clearly there was something here. Honestly, I don't have much to say about Battle Arena Toshinden. It neither frustrated me nor amazed me. It was a perfectly inoffensive fighting game that I retroactively respect for its legacy. Turns out, an inoffensive fighting game was really all you needed to be the best fighting game to release on launch day. This one was a trip. The Raiden project, developed and published by Seibu Kaihatsu, are ports of classic arcade bullet hells. I haven't played many bullet hells, so this might be par for the course, but this game was absolute insanity. The concept is simple enough. You control a teeny tiny little ship as you fly across the map, destroying all the enemy ships, turrets, and other mechanical contraptions along your way. One hit from any stray bullet and you're done. Life taken. As you destroy enemies, you gain points and sometimes receive upgrades that increase your firepower. That's where the insanity begins. Both games that make up this port are fast and intense, but the Raiden Project 2 takes the chaos to the next level. Trying to keep track of your ship, your own bullets, the enemy projectiles coming your way, and the seemingly endless hordes of enemies spawning on screen made for intense and hectic scenes where I just lost track of what was going on. Your own weapons become ridiculous too. With just a few upgrades, your burst fire bullets turn into this massive, curling laser beam that glues onto enemies and just shreds them. It was insane. It really reminded me of like Goku's Kamehameha when he's able to like move it around and curve it in the show. Oh, and the soundtrack is a high-octane, adrenaline-pumping bop. The game kind of rocks. There's not much else to talk about with it. No in-depth mission structure, no real story to speak of, just pure bullet hell action, and I'm all here for it. When I decided to go back and play a bunch of old PS1 games, this was the type of game I most looked forward to playing. Kiliak, the DNA Imperative, is such a weird and interesting little experience. Developed by a Japanese studio, Genki, Kiliak sees you take control of a hulking mech as you enter into a science fiction laboratory building in search of a mad scientist, Dr. Kim, who's been conducting vile genetic engineering research. This game just oozes mid-1990s PlayStation style from its graphics, music, and voice acting. Just watch the opening cutscene and tell me this doesn't take you back in time to an era before the extremely high-budget cinematic style of games we see today.
August 16, 2038. International Peacekeeping Force Headquarters, Auckland. Control picks up an urgent message from undercover agent Franco Fukuzawa at the South Pole observation base of the giant Bifrost group. The message reads, "Situation critical. Kim must be stopped. Repeat, Kim must be stopped." Hours later, a Liger assault chopper is speeding toward the South Base, carrying the IPKF's most elite polar operations team, White Lightning.
Now entering Bifrost South Pole Observation Base airspace. Time to target, 360 seconds. Enter Protect Armor. Stand by for landing and entry.
Captain, data screen shows evidence of survivors on base. Isolate all survivors and watch your backs. All right, men, time to go to work.
Heat-seeking missiles approaching at 8 o'clock. Initiate emergency evasion maneuver. Time remaining to impact, 4 seconds. 3 seconds. Evasion maneuver unsuccessful.
Protect armor impact defense mode on.
It's awesome, right? The atmosphere of Kiliak is one part science fiction action and one part unnerving horror. It's got a really good vibe to it and the music fits the pieces together. The atmospheric noise helps set the tone too, especially in later cavernous areas where all you can hear is the slow dripping of water in the distance, creating this feeling of emptiness and a deep dark unknown waiting before you. The controls on the mech are serviceable. Most of the game consists of long square corridors, so dynamic movement isn't exactly a huge concern. However, if you do end up having to shoot anything above or below you, it can really be clunky as you hold one of the shoulder buttons first, then press down on the D-pad before finally pressing the corresponding button to shoot, forcing you to stop in your tracks each time you want to look down or attack one of the many floor trap enemies that are scattered all over the place. Outside of just walking in straight lines and killing whatever's in your path, Kiliak also emphasizes resource management. Your ammunition and energy is finite. If you run out of bullets, well, good luck trying to kill anything. If you run out of energy, it's game over as your mech shuts down. Of course, you can also just die by losing enough health. Thankfully, in classic shooter fashion, enemies will drop refills of health, energy, and ammunition, as well as being able to find them while exploring the various rooms in each level. Exploring becomes an interesting push and pull as you decide just how much to explore and when you push forward, considering your resources. And exploring can be greatly worth the risk. Completing certain puzzles throughout the certain levels will even unlock new weapons for you to use for the rest of the game. One major problem though is that none of your resources are reset between levels. If you just skated by the last floor and are low on energy, more than likely you're gonna die early on the next level since you'll still be low on energy. Feels like you need to have the game kind of mapped out ahead of time in order to really complete it, given how strict those resources are. The biggest strength of Kiliak is how it executes on its premise. They lean heavily into the sci-fi elements, from the weird machines you destroy to the walls surrounding you. It all builds a great atmosphere for fans of this uneasy sci-fi style. But of all the launch games on the PlayStation 1, Kiliak is definitely the most unique and interesting. Dude, what the hell is this game? I've always been kind of an outsider Rayman fan. I played Rayman 3 a little bit as a rental when I was younger, and I always wanted to play more of them. I just never had long-term access to them. In high school, I ended up playing a large chunk of Rayman Legends, and I loved it a lot. So returning to this Ubisoft franchise in its original form on the PlayStation 1, I thought it was going to be a treat, and what I got was a frustrating, brutal, and oppressive platformer that made me want to chuck my controller out the window. The original Rayman is crushingly difficult. You wouldn't think it from the initial level or two. They are your run-of-the-mill introductory levels. Simple, clean, easy. But the further you get, the more asinine the platforming gets. Precise jumps, tight time windows for moving platforms, enemies, projectiles, and death traps off screen designed to kill you if you don't already know it's coming, or, I guess if you have some godlike reaction time, maybe you could avoid it. It honestly reminds me a lot of Super Meat Boy or a toned down Kaizo Mario. I can see the vision in Rayman. The art style and pixel graphics are gorgeous and still blow me away even after decades of age. The soundtrack is full of whimsical, fun, poppy tracks. The platforming itself is slightly floaty but very responsive. By all metrics, the game is functionally sound. But if you were a parent and bought this game for your child on launch day, if you were expecting some kind of Mario Wahoo type experience, you'd actually be giving your child long-term life trauma. Apparently there's an explanation for this too. Evidently, during the entire development cycle, only the dev team ever playtested it. And since they literally created the game, they, of course, knew everything that was going to happen from screen to screen, and essentially practiced it every single day. So when it was released to a regular player, it quickly became apparent that perhaps having someone other than the dev team play the game might be a good idea. If Kaizo games are your speed, or even just extremely punishing platformers are something you enjoy, by all means, Rayman would deserve you a try even today. That's also why it ranks so high. Not a broken game, nor is it unenjoyable. By all means, the original Rayman is a well-made, solid platformer that speaks to a very specific audience of sickos who love challenging platformers. That's not me. For me, unless I become a mega Rayman fan sometime in the future, can't see myself pushing through this game to the end, let alone trying for 100%. I love difficult games, Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Neo. Those kinds of games are absolutely my speed. But punishing platformers, just not my cup of tea. Okay, so I've never done crack, but if I did, I feel like it'd be a little bit like NBA Jam. This crazy basketball sim was ported from the arcade cabinet to practically every console and handheld of the era, from Super Nintendo to Game Boy to PS1 and beyond. Midway, the developer of the original game, they really knew how to make a coin-stealing arcade game, let me tell you. The game has a 2v2 team setup. Pick your team of choice, swap players in and out of your lineup, and try to score more points than the other team in 4 quarters of play. Simple enough? Wrong. This game is so fast and frenetic and chaotic. The time flies, and before you know it, you've been playing all night trying to beat the next team on your quest to beat all the teams in the NBA. I said Midway made a game that steals coins, and I was not joking. I don't know if there is a real science behind it, but almost every single game ends with a 1 or 2 score margin. If you're absolutely steamrolling the opposing AI, getting every steal, putting up 10 points in a flash, the AI is going to go into turbo mode and suddenly start pushing super aggressively, stealing the ball at like a 100% rate and making every single three-pointer possible. It can sometimes feel like the only quarter of basketball that really matters is the last quarter because of how the AI will suddenly close the gap in an instant. Meanwhile, your teammate's AI is completely incompetent. Don't even dare passing the ball to your teammate unless they are completely open for a free shot. Most of the time, passing the ball to my teammate was an invitation for the other team to steal the ball. There were so many times when I was playing defense 2 versus 1 because for some unknown reason, my team was just a mile away, hanging out in the stands, eating some popcorn, taking a nap. Don't know where he went, he was just gone. Still, it is addicting. Think about how chaotic it is, how satisfying it is to throw up a three-pointer and see it swoosh in the basket, or jumping 10 feet in the air to bring down a flashy slam dunk. It's so stylish, so exciting. For those who played it when they were younger with friends, I could see how hours and hours of time could be spent playing this game, trading steals and buckets. Out of the 3 sports simulation games that launched on PlayStation 1, NBA Jam would have been an easy pickup even for non-basketball fans. There's a reason NBA Jam has such a strong legacy in the history of sports games, and it's well deserved. Developed by Namco, better known as Bandai Namco today, Air Combat is the first in a long-running series of flight combat simulation games that is known better under the name Ace Combat, and which spans 11 titles for each PlayStation generation up to the PS4. Air Combat is, like many early PS1 titles, a port of an already existing arcade game. It's a pretty simple premise. You fly around as one of many different models of jet fighters, complete missions with various objectives ranging from destroying all enemy jets to sabotaging the infrastructure. There's also a 2-player versus mode where you can fight against your friends in one-on-one dogfights. Before each mission, you can also choose one of a few wingmen to accompany you, or you can choose to fly the mission solo. Though, I never really found the wingmen very useful outside of occasionally drawing enemy attention away from myself. The controls were surprisingly easy to get used to. You can use the D-pad to move your jet around, you can fly in first person or third person with the select button, circle fires your powerful missiles that lock on, X fires a machine gun. Simple controls for a simple game. Missions can get frenetic at times, especially when there's multiple jets engaging you at the same time. The visual style is bright and vibrant, making everything easy to see, and the soundtrack is an absolute banger. It's not a very long game either. The missions usually are pretty short, and the entire game only lasts about 3 to 4 hours. Between missions, you can unlock and buy new jets that have different stats and playstyles. Some are fast and nimble, but do less damage. Others are hulking and defensive, but aren't super flexible. The real kicker here is that if your jet is destroyed in a mission, it's lost forever. So you essentially have lives in the form of how many jets you still have in your hangar. There are some glaring issues though. For one, areas can often be way too big for their own good. You will find yourself flying above massive stretches of absolutely nothing more often than you'd like. Hitboxes on buildings and terrain are incredibly inconsistent. Sometimes you can thread the needle while flying past a cliff or in between beams of heavy machinery. Other times, you crash into a hitbox that extends well beyond the building itself. The machine gun also feels pretty worthless compared to the missiles. You're encouraged to use it due to the missiles having a limited ammunition resource, but rarely becomes a problem. Still, there's something very pleasing and enjoyable about just flying around in a high-speed jet, blowing up other jets and buildings, all while rocking out to an awesome Top Gun-like soundtrack. It really gets your blood pumping and adrenaline going. Air Combat is an example that sometimes a simple concept with proper execution can result in loads of fun. If I picked up a PlayStation on release day with this game, I think I would have been quite happy. That sound evokes so many memories, man. Ridge Racer was a game I had as a kid that I played over and over and over. I loved the music, the high speed, the bright colors, playing Galaxian on the loading screens. I was super excited to see how this arcade racer from Namco held up all this time later, and honestly, as you can see by my placement on the list, I think it holds up pretty well. Let me go ahead and say up front that I think nostalgia is going to play a huge part in my ranking of Ridge Racer. If looking at it from the viewpoint of a purely racing video game, even in the PS1 era, Ridge Racer needs some help, mainly because of the racetracks, of which there is one. Well, okay, technically there are a couple variations of the same track. A road breaks off differently here, drive in reverse there, but fundamentally it's the same single track for every race. Also, one of the core mechanics of Ridge Racer is drifting, which is meant to allow you to take turns in sharp corners without losing too much speed or momentum. Problem was, I honestly found it a bit easier to just slow down and take the turn more carefully. Most of the time, drifting ended with a spin out or losing so much speed that it didn't really matter. But enough of all that. Let's talk about the good stuff. The soundtrack is a banger. It may be limited in selection, but each song so perfectly fits the high throttle adrenaline pumping speed of the races. Every time I hear one of the tracks, I feel like I could run 10 miles at full sprint. As mentioned before, the smooth and colorful art style really does a lot to make everything pop. It's an arcade racer after all, and choosing to make colors pop allows Ridge Racer to feel inviting exciting, and joyful. The racing itself, boy, is fast. You can seriously reach some ridiculous feeling speeds in this game. There's one tunnel early on in the race where you really get to pick up some speed as you take a fairly wide turn before coming out into this awesome bridge, the helicopter constantly flying overhead and recording all the action. This one segment here just fills me with so many memories, man. Your car can move so fast with so little traction, it starts to feel like you're gliding on air. It's awesome. I'm really glad I ended up going back to play this game. See, as a kid, there was no way in hell I was going to have the skills and patience necessary to ever finish this game or see the credits. I could win a race on the easiest difficulty, sure, but anything higher than that and I'd be steamrolled. Now, as an adult with way too much passion pent up inside me, I can commit to learning each track, developing a preference for my favorite car, and trying to finally see the end. It may have taken about 20 years, but I can now proudly say I have beaten Ridge Racer. At least I've seen the credits. When you finish Ridge Racer, one extra race unlocks. The race begins at night on a reverse version of the main track. It's just you and that damnable yellow Lamborghini that's been your arch rival for so many races at this point. It's always constantly narrowly passing you at the last possible second to make you lose a race. That is, until you reach about halfway, when you flash by a black car sitting on the side of the road. Before you even get a chance to realize that there was a car just sitting there, it has now reached top speed and burns past you like it's nothing. This is the Devil Car, the fastest car in the game. If you can win a race against this guy, you unlock the car to use yourself. I did not beat the Devil Car. To do so means essentially memorizing not only the entire track and almost playing perfectly, but it also means memorizing the movement pattern of the Devil Car itself, so that you can constantly block it off from trying to pass you. As much as I enjoyed my time with Ridge Racer, simply beating it was enough to satisfy myself. If you've ever taken on the Devil Car, especially if you've won, let me know down in the comments below how you did it. Is Ridge Racer the best racing game on the PS1? Of course not. One track, limited music, and questionable drifting definitely holds it back. But for being the only racing game on the PS1 at launch, Ridge Racer was a blast and a real trip down memory lane that I'm so glad I returned to after all these years. And I finally got to fulfill a childhood dream of mine, to see those credits, and I couldn't be happier about that. And so, that's every PS1 launch title. 12 options to choose from after picking up your own brand new console. I think this launch lineup is okay. There's some genuinely good experiences here, and I really enjoyed my time with games like Air Combat and NBA Jam, even though it frustrates me. I got to fulfill one of my childhood dreams by beating Ridge Racer, and there are plenty of weird and interesting titles to play here, from Kiliak and the frustrating platformer that is Rayman. But, of course, there's horrible stinkers, Street Fighter the movie, Power Serve 3D Tennis, things that you'd probably want to return your PS1 for rather than buy one for it. I think seeing this lineup has helped me appreciate how the PS1 began. We all remember Spyro and Crash Bandicoot and Metal Gear Solid. This is where all of those began. This is what the early PS1 days looked like, and it's pretty awesome to see how far this console really came by the time it was retired. What did you think of the PS1 launch library? Which games would you have picked up on your launch PS1? Let me know in the comments section down below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Let's talk again later.